Hey everyone, Teddy's newest chapter is coming out soon. This video will cover Teddy's current story up to that point, and as usual, I will make another video about the newest chapter once it comes out. Since their first appearance in chapter 19, Karina's latest chapter, Teddy has been involved in many different parts of the main story. As usual, I try to focus on the parts in which Teddy had a more prominent role, while briefly mentioning the others just for context. That said, let's get into it. Christina is the eldest daughter of Edward, the son of Charles Norman, the chief executive officer of the Norman Mining Corp, one of the most influential organizations during the Golden Age. Norman Mining Corp collaborated with Dominic in many of his researches, which pioneered many technologies towards the end of the Golden Age, from the tantalum copolymers used to build constructs, zero-point reactors, gestalt, and much more. Following the punishing outbreak, Christina grew up in Babylonia with his older brother Leonardo and her younger sister Victoria. However, upon learning that Dominic and his team had disappeared after shutting down the zero-point reactor that caused the punishing outbreak, Charles Norman had been obsessed with retrieving Dominic's legacy. Any information about these researchers that had been lost during the outbreak, since most of the data had been destroyed or contaminated by the punishing virus. In order to retrieve as much information as possible, he had started Project Herald and sent them many first-generation constructs in the heavily infected area nearby Reactor 1, hoping that they could find any trace of Dominic. In order to restore the family's glory, Charles had also sent Edward, but none of the heralds came back alive. After the failure of Project Herald and the loss of his only son, Charles attempted to solidify his position within the company by controlling his grandchildren. However, he had never liked Leonardo, and he deemed him a failure as soon as he learned about his incompatibility with the tantalum copolymers. Christina, instead, had been very intelligent from a very young age. He had labeled her as Dominic's successor, someone that could follow on his path, bringing humanity and the Norman family to a new height. This had always put a lot of pressure on her, but even if she had never liked that label, that was not her main concern. Following their father's death, Charles had prevented Leonardo and Christina from seeing their sister Victoria whenever they wanted. He used the pretext of her precarious health condition to keep her away from them, using her as leverage in order to keep them under control. But since Victoria was also younger, he wanted to avoid her influence, molding her into his perfect heir, someone that he could manipulate behind the scenes. Both Leonardo and Christina hated their family, but despite their attempts, they never managed to rescue Victoria from their grandfather. Eventually, they decided to leave their family together, hoping that they could gather enough incriminating information about Charles so that he would lose his position within the company. Christina chose to become a construct, but in the end, Leonardo betrayed her, choosing to return to his family in order to inherit their fortune. At least, that had been his excuse. Deep down, he believed that he would have more opportunities to protect his sisters only if he remained within the family. After that, Christina chose to abandon her family name and join the engineering force as Teddy, eventually becoming the vice captain under Karenina. After the Puglia Forest Park disaster, flying Hydro creatures has swarmed the skies, preventing Babylonia to safely send reinforcements and bring back the task force squads stranded on the surface. Because of this, the engineering force had been tasked with creating a new aircraft engine that could counter the flying Hydro creatures. In the meantime, the Science Council had been developing an Omega weapon using the data of the Omega file retrieved from Atlantis, but since they needed to install it in a construct frame in order to make it more effective, they had decided to collaborate with Kurono. This research required a zero-point reactor, and since the only functional one was on the moon, Karina and Teddy had been sent there to reactivate it, collaborating with the Kurono researchers. After completing the Omega prototype, Teddy had helped Karenina calibrate her new Shire frame. Its base framework had been developed after obtaining ascendant data from Luna, which Kurono had captured and imprisoned at Fort Winter before bringing her to the Lunar Base. Initially unaware of this, Teddy and Karenina found Luna in prison before the Mega Omega weapon that they had just developed, and they realized that was Colin's original goal. He had wanted to reactivate the zero-point reactor just to power up the Omega weapon, since it will be able to restrain Luna even in a conscious state by constantly absorbing her punishing virus, which will facilitate their research on the Ascension network. Despite all this, Karenina and Teddy kept working with Kurono, improving the output of the zero-point reactor since they needed it to produce the Omega weapons to have the task force teams on the surface. However, Karenina eventually discovered a sudden increase in the level of punishing virus inside the reactor. Taking advantage of a new frame, she attempted to shut it down, but the intense gravitational waves that it was generating prevented her from approaching it. According to Teddy's calculations, the reactor would eventually explode, causing a portion of the moon itself to implode, and massive debris will be able to reach the Earth at an incredibly high velocity. The only way to prevent such a disaster was to destroy the reactor, but since it was also the only source of Omega weapons, they needed Babylonia's approval first. Their communications were being disrupted by the punishing virus, but eventually Carolina managed to contact Babylonia. Despite their initial reluctance, the Grey Raven Commandant eventually convinced the Parliament to authorize the destruction of the reactor. While Carolina dealt with the other creature emerged from the infected reactor, Teddy and the other researchers collected as much data as possible, so that eventually they might be able to rebuild a new zero-point reactor. Following the incident at the Copperfield Aquarium, Carolina and Teddy had been sent to deliver and install Omega weapons along the shoreline, mitigating the impact of the contaminated ocean and all the other creatures that had emerged from the sea. When Schultz and Cradle's other creatures that attacked the city of Cologne, Teddy had been tasked with analyzing the underground structure of Tabula Casa's physical layer, which was a blueprint made by Norman Mining Corp. Then, Teddy and Carolina had been sent to help with the evacuation of Cologne's refugees, setting up explosives to create an opening that would lead directly to the core layer of Tabula Casa. After defeating Schultz, Chu had handed an invitation to the Grey Raven Commandant, a small memory card that she had obtained from Dominic within the digital layer of the Tabula Casa, in which it manifested himself as Nanami. Upon returning to Babylonia, the Commandant had given the invitation to Asimov in order to decode it, and since it used a data log with an algorithm from the Golden Age, Teddy assisted him in the process. Following the Battle of Cologne, the Other Zone has started to expand under Cradle's influence, intent in building her own civilization by facilitating the evolution of the other creatures under her control. The Grey Raven Commandant, Liv, and Lucia had been sent to the surface to investigate the sudden expansion, since it had reached even the city in which the first zero-point reactor was located. In the meantime, the Science Council, the Engineering Force, and the Cosmos Technicians Union were working together to improve the technology of their central purification filters, combining their expertise on invert device technology, energy dynamics, and Omega weaponry. Mika, a construct from the Cosmos Technicians Union, had proposed to increase the capacity of the invert device by utilizing more computing power, allowing it to filter out more punishing virus at a higher rate. This involved using Gestalt itself as a processing unit, but to prevent that the infection will reach Gestalt in case of failure, the construct that led the experiment will need to be equipped with mine needle probes and electromagnetic pulse frailty rings. She volunteered for it, but Teddy proposed to establish a small isolation area within Gestalt, allowing incoming data to pass only through that, and if reverse infection occurs, they will be able to abandon it and destroy it before the infection could reach other sections of Gestalt. When Bollard had attempted to manipulate the Forsaken to incite a war against Babylonia, the Parliament almost opted to sedate the conflict by utilizing the Longinus arsenal. This action had been prevented by Gestalt itself, which had released a sealed message recorded by Trilard, the president of the war government at the end of the Golden Age. However, doing so had also caused a breach in the sealed section of Gestalt, and upon realizing that this section might contain valuable information on lost technologies of the Golden Age, many had wanted to delve deeper despite the potential risks. After all, Gestalt itself had been partially infected by the punishing virus during the outbreak, and before being shut down by Nithar, it had attempted to launch many ballistic missiles toward Babylonia. Charles Normal wanted to take advantage of this, using Victoria as his successor in order to restart Project Herald. Through her, he provided classified information about Gestalt to the military, and in exchange, he required that Norman researchers could also participate in the invert device experiments that were being conducted on Gestalt, and they wanted to appoint Teddy as the construct that would perform the connection. Teddy could have refused, knowing that the grandfather wanted to take advantage of the experiment to find more information about Dominic's legacy, but the experiment would have been very valuable for humanity, and so she accepted the role nonetheless. Since the Grey Raven Commander was the only one that had prior experience in operations within Gestalt, Asimov had requested us to return to Babylonia in order to have stabilized Teddy's mind during the process. The enhancement to the invert device allowed Teddy to withstand higher concentration of punishing virus, and during the dive within Gestalt, she investigated one of the breaches of its sealed section, retrieving information about the invert device, the schematic of an unfinished concept for modifying it. A version with a more powerful processor, which was a concept that aligned with their current experiment. It seemed too much of a coincidence that they were finding this kind of information at this very time, as if someone from within had been guiding their discoveries. The experiments continued for multiple days, constantly upgrading the external interface to the invert device, and eventually Teddy found Gestalt's data wall, sealing an entire section from the inside out. During this time, Asimov and Teddy had also finished to decrypt the invitation received from Chu. Its internal code was very similar to the one used by Nanami when she had developed her full sensory simulation device, and Asimov had used it to reverse engineer the final invitation. After restarting Project Herald, Norman had sent many of its heralds in the heavily infected area in the proximity of Reactor 1, hoping that they could go further and retrieve more valuable data left behind by Dominic. Upon learning the shards that convinced Victoria to take part in the expedition, Leonardo and Troyan had kidnapped her, and he took her place as one of the heralds. Upon discovering this, Teddy requested to be sent on the surface to rescue his brother, since that would have been also an opportunity to test their new enhanced timber device in a highly infected area. Despite her initial reluctance, Karenina eventually approved the mission, and Teddy joined Lee and the Grey Raven Commandant, since they had also requested to support Liv and Lucia after they had lost contact with them. On the surface, we eventually meet with Liv and Lucia, which were still attempting to rescue a group of refugees, leading them outside of the Adrift zone so that they could reach the clean zone. We learned that Cradle had already attacked many of the heralds sent by Norman, and after rescuing an unconscious Leonardo, we ventured deeper into the area of Reactor 1 with Lee and Teddy. Once there, Teddy had a brief confrontation with Cradle, but aided by her connection and her enhanced Inver device, Teddy was able to defeat her. In a heavily infected environment, Cradle was able to fully regenerate thanks to the Red Tide, but she seemed to realize that her current strength was not enough to fully develop her own civilization. She needed more time, and knowing that Lee was also nearby, humanity's most powerful construct, she eventually decided to retreat, stopping the rapid expansion of the Adrift zone and eventually causing it to shrink. Upon learning what had happened, Victoria rebelled against his grandfather, putting him in a coma and taking full control over the company, stopping Project Herald and ending all the related information to the military. Norman didn't need glory that came at the expense of human lives. Following Teddy's experiment with Gestalt and on the surface, Asimov informed them that they might be able to use the data to develop a new type of Inver device, which will be more stable and have a higher compatibility. After all, since Teddy didn't have a particularly stable mind or a specialized frame, then the experiment had been even more valuable, since it meant that it would be easier to apply those results to more constructs with regular frames. Now that the Adrift zone was no longer an immediate threat, Asimov reconstructed the machine to interface with Gestalt, using the blueprints left by Nanami in order to utilize the decoded invitation. Teddy and Asimov monitored the simulation from outside, and as we interfaced with Gestalt, we entered in contact with Dominic's memory data. We learned that Dominic had uploaded it into Gestalt before shutting down Reactor 1, but as a result, it was also partially contaminated. He could not disclose too much information about the real Dominic's whereabouts and the punishing virus itself. Some of that information was unknown even to him, but some of it did not belong to the current civilization. Even the punishing outbreak was not a mistake by itself. However, it had happened at a time when it shouldn't have, attracting a flame that humanity had been unable to control. The Inver device had been born from that, attempting to rekindle hope in a transient civilization. In order to obtain more information, Dominic's memory data requested us to merge with it, becoming a new Dominic, but we refused, choosing to not rely on a relic of the past. Dominic's memory data had expected such an answer, since this kind of determination was required to even open the invitation. However, before breaking the connection, it warned us that Gestalt's data wall was about to fail, releasing something that had been trapped within. Despite our warnings, the Parliament still approved the resolution to breach the data wall, hoping to retrieve valuable information on Golden Age technology, and the following day, Teddy initiated the hijacking. The contamination was immediate, disrupting communication and causing power failures in all of Babylonia. Agent Zero, trapped within Gestalt following the punishing outbreak, had been released. As Teddy and Karenina attempted to restore Babylonia's power, Agent Zero managed to escape, aided by Selene, disappearing within the Adrift Tower, where they attempted to merge with the Ascension Network. Aided by Grey Raven, Luna made a deal with Cradle to merge with the Red Tide and shape a new frame, which she eventually used to defeat Selene and reacquire full authority as an agent of the Ascension Network. When Bridget and the Grey Raven Commandant had lost contact with Babylonia while exploring the abandoned Constantine mine, Teddy and Karenina had been sent to perform a rescue operation, creating access points to bring out the survivors. During the evacuation, they had lost contact with Bridget, but Teddy managed to track her deeper into the mine by hacking into her terminal, so they were able to escort her out after her encounter with Skitch, the butler of the normal family that had been turned into a construct and abandoned in the mine after being experimented on. In the new timeline, when Selena had attempted to erase traces of her existence while trapping both herself and Enoro in the past, Teddy had assisted Isla and the Grey Raven Commandant in gathering more clues about her, using Isla's panting about Selena to detect more anomalies from people related to the WGAA. This led them to discover Selena's capricious frame in a Babylonia warehouse, something that was meant to be destroyed to prevent an aura from latching into the present through a time travel device. However, we encountered one of Enora's duplicates in the warehouse, and after interacting with the device that she had left behind, we ended up reaching Selena in the past, which had assumed the identity of Iris. During this time, Asimov and Teddy analyzed part of the device that remained at the warehouse and discovered that it was related to the Abbas Research Institute, known for studying Tenebrian energy. After helping Iris against Terrora in the past, we eventually returned to the present. However, at the time, we didn't know who Iris truly was, and after realizing that Selena had deceived us, trapping herself in the past just to prevent Enora from escaping, we wanted to find a way to bring her back. Aided by Asimov and Teddy, we eventually managed to retrieve more white noise devices, which Enora had used to attack us before Selena trapped her in the past. After connecting them to the Hamlet simulation device, we were able to establish a connection with Selena, reaching her in the past and allowing her to escape from a entire prison that she had created to trap Enora. When Bianca was sent to investigate the Copperfield Aquarium, looking for the missing Chico, Babylonia eventually lost contact with her. The Grey Raven Commander was having visions related to the aquarium that belonged to her previous timeline, and taking advantage of this information, Babylonia was able to properly prepare for the incoming threat. This time around, Teddy and Karenina were sent to deploy Omega weapons on the surface ahead of time, and were also tasked with delivering her new frame to Bianca. Without the aid of the Phantom Tracer and our presence to stabilize her mind, this time around, Bianca had been overwhelmed by Lida's attacks, trapping her in the lower levels of the aquarium. While the Grey Raven Commandant, Lucia and Chrome attempted to reach her from within, Teddy and Karenina dug a path through the ventilation ducts to avoid the red tide. Vonnegut tried to interfere, believing that we were somehow responsible for the sudden absence of information coming from his future self within the Adro Tower, but Teddy and Karenina were able to delay him, and after delivering the new frame to Bianca, she forced him to retreat. After returning to the shore, Teddy and Karenina helped the task force teams in defending the shoreline against the Adro creatures that emerged from the sea. But this time around, the contamination of the ocean had been drastically reduced by Chico, which had absorbed most of the red tide before being killed by Bianca. Even in the new timeline, Teddy performed the experiments to enhance the Inver device through Gestalt like before. However, this time around, since the Adro Tower never descended, Cradle was missing the Agent Zero component, and she never expanded the red tide in the area of Reactor 1, so there was never a confrontation between the two. Like before, Teddy and Asimov decrypted the invitation that the Grey Raven Commandant had received from Chu, but this time around, Dominic's memory data had detected an anomaly, and he suspected that we had interfered with time. He then realized that the Adro Tower had stopped growing, which prevented sending information back in time. Considering this anomaly, he revealed more information about the fog, Dominic's advanced team, Agent Zero, the purpose of keys, and the invitations. But since our memories related to the previous timeline were still partially sealed by chaos, we didn't know what most of that meant. Nonetheless, we still refused to become the next Dominic. The black box within Gestalt containing information about the Golden Age was destined to crumble regardless of human intervention. Just like before, the Parliament approved the breach of the Dada Wall, and Teddy performed the hijacking, releasing Agent Zero. This time around, Luna had to reshape a new frame without Cradle's assistance, but eventually she still managed to defeat Selene and reacquire full authority as an agent of the Ascension Network, neutralizing Agent Zero and preventing it from merging with Cradle. That's it for Teddy's story so far. Considering that the latest chapter ended with Babylonia being under attack, Teddy will be a great character to deal with it, but after seeing her preview videos, I don't really know what to expect from her chapter. Considering Aisling, it could be part of some sort of illusion or simulation, and there was a very brief mention of Wheel of Fortune, so maybe it's still connected to Babylonia's attack. It will be a bit weird to get a side story chapter right after the cliffhanger at the end of Liv's story, but who knows. It would be cool if Mono, the new boss, was Wheel of Fortune's real appearance, or maybe just its digital form similarly to the Emperor for Schultz. Probably not, but we'll see. I just hope it won't be a filler chapter, especially considering that Teddy is a very good character that can be connected to a lot of stuff. From the normal family, to the Inver device, and honestly anything related to potential new technologies. Anyway, as usual, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.